The lights were already hot on his skin when the first tear fell. It surprised him as much as it surprised the audience, that single drop breaking loose before the music even began. In that moment, before a note was sung, before the judges leaned forward, something inside this Filipino Elvis cracked open, and millions would later ask the same question: what could make a man dress like a legend, standing on the world's biggest stage, cry like his life was falling apart? Stay with this story until the end, because what happens next is not just about music or talent, but about hope being handed to someone who thought he had run out of reasons to breathe. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, because sometimes one story can change how you see your own struggles. He grew up in a small coastal town in the Philippines where the sea was generous but life was not. His real name barely mattered to anyone outside his family, but everyone knew him as Elvis long before he ever set foot on a stage. As a boy, he would stand barefoot on cracked cement floors, holding a broken comb like a microphone, copying the moves he saw on an old, flickering TV. The signal was bad, the sound worse, but Elvis Presley's voice cut through everything. To him, Elvis wasn't just a singer, he was an escape route. When his father came home exhausted and empty-handed, when his mother counted coins inside, when the roof leaked during storms, that music made the walls feel wider. But life doesn't let you stay a dreamer forever. As he grew older, responsibility arrived early and without mercy. His father fell ill, medical bills stacked up, and the boy who once danced for fun started working long hours doing whatever he could find: construction, loading trucks, singing in cheap bars where no one listened. At night, he would still put on the Elvis songs, but now they sounded different. They didn't just make him happy, they reminded him of everything he wasn't yet. Still, people noticed. "You sound just like him," they would say, sometimes laughing, sometimes amazed. Those words became fuel. He started performing as an Elvis impersonator at small events, weddings, and fiestas, earning just enough to survive. Then life hit harder. His father passed away, leaving his silence heavier than any music. His mother aged overnight, and the pressure of being the only support crushed his chest daily. The gigs dried up. His voice, once strong, started cracking, not from lack of skill, but from stress, sleepless nights, and the constant fear of failing the one person who still depended on him. There were nights he sat alone, staring at the costume hanging in the corner, wondering if it was all a childish fantasy that had stolen years of his life. More than once, he considered giving it up forever. America's Got Talent was never part of the plan. It felt too far away, too big, too impossible for someone whose passport had barely been used. But a friend pushed him, sending in an audition video almost as a joke. When the email came back an invitation, he thought it was fake. When it wasn't, fear replaced excitement. How could he carry his entire broken life onto a stage watched by millions? How could he sing songs of confidence when he felt hollow inside? The journey to AGT was a blur of borrowed money, sleepless flights, and silent prayers. Backstage, surrounded by confident performers, he felt small again, like that barefoot boy watching a fuzzy TV. He adjusted the Elvis suit with shaking hands, not because it was tight, but because it felt heavy with expectation. This wasn't just about winning. This was about proving to himself, to his mother back home, to the memory of his father, that the dream had been worth the pain. When his name was called, his legs nearly gave out. He stepped onto the stage, lights blinding, audience buzzing. The judges smiled politely, not yet knowing what they were about to witness. Then the music cue came, and that's when it happened. The tears. They weren't planned. They carried years of hunger, loss, doubt, and stubborn hope. He tried to speak, but his voice trembled. The audience went quiet. This wasn't a gimmick. This was a man unraveling in real time. He explained, haltingly, why Elvis mattered to him. How the songs carried him through nights when he felt invisible. How his life back home was falling apart. How this stage felt like his last door. By the time he finished, even the judges had changed posture. This was no longer an audition, it was a confession. Then he sang. The first note wasn't perfect, but it was honest. As the song built, something shifted. The fear loosened its grip, replaced by muscle memory, by love for the music that had saved him again and again. His voice grew stronger, richer, filling the theater with something raw and familiar yet deeply personal. People who had heard Elvis 1,000 times felt like they were hearing the song for the first time. Not because it was flawless, but because it was real. By the final note, the tears had stopped. He stood there, chest heaving, unsure if he had just ruined everything or finally told his truth. The silence lasted a second too long, then the room exploded. The audience rose to their feet, applause crashing like waves. The judges' eyes glistened. Words like brave, authentic, and unforgettable floated across the stage, but the one that mattered most was simple: yes. That moment didn't magically fix his life. Back home, bills still waited. His mother still worried. The future was still uncertain. But something fundamental had changed. He had been seen not as an imitation, not as a joke, but as a human being carrying a story worth hearing. Each round he advanced felt like borrowed time, like a gift he promised not to waste. Behind the scenes, he still cried sometimes, overwhelmed by how close he came to giving up. He called his mother daily, telling her about the lights, the crowd, the kindness of strangers. For the first time in years, she heard hope in his voice. Not certainty, but hope. When his AGT journey eventually ended, as all competitions do, it didn't feel like a loss. Doors opened. Invitations came. More importantly, belief returned. He went back home not as a man who escaped his past, but as someone who had faced it and survived. He sang again in small venues, but now people listened differently. Children looked at him the way he once looked at Elvis on that broken TV, proof that dreams could travel across oceans. What made this Filipino Elvis cry on stage wasn't weakness. It was the weight of carrying a broken life while still daring to sing. AGT didn't give him fame alone, it gave him permission to hope again. And maybe that's the real reason stories like this matter. Because somewhere right now, someone is watching this video feeling like their own life is falling apart, wondering if it's too late. If this story touched you, let it remind you that tears don't mean the end, they often mean the turning point. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us, because the next story you hear might be the one that gives you the courage to step onto your own stage. The night he almost quit music forever was quiet, painfully quiet. No applause, no music, no cheering crowd, just the low hum of an electric fan and the distant sound of waves crashing somewhere beyond the dark window. He sat on the edge of his bed, Elvis costume folded neatly beside him, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. These hands had carried speakers, mixed cement, washed dishes, and held microphones in smoky bars where people talked over his voice. Tonight, they trembled. He whispered to himself, maybe this is where it ends. He didn't know that on the other side of the ocean, a stage was waiting that would break him open and then slowly put him back together again. From the time he was a child, music was not a hobby, it was survival. In his neighborhood, dreams were luxuries, and most kids learned early not to want too much. But he wanted something he couldn't explain. When Elvis Presley's voice came through that old television, it felt like someone had reached across time and geography just to tell him, you are allowed to feel big things. He memorized every move, every note, every pause. While other children played outside, he practiced in front of cracked mirrors, imagining an audience that didn't exist yet. His parents supported him the only way they knew how, by not stopping him. They couldn't afford lessons, instruments, or fancy clothes, but they never told him to stop singing. His father would sometimes sit quietly after a long day, listening from the doorway, a tired smile on his face. Those moments became sacred. When his father fell sick, music changed shape. It wasn't just joy anymore, it became prayer. He sang softly at night, hoping somehow the notes could heal what medicine could not. When his father passed away, something inside him collapsed. The house felt emptier than ever, and silence became his enemy. He sang to avoid thinking, sang to avoid feeling, sang because if he stopped, the grief would swallow him whole. He took every job he could get, wearing the Elvis costume even when it felt ridiculous, even when people laughed or took photos like he was a novelty. He told himself it didn't matter. Money was money. Pride didn't feed his mother. But rejection has a way of piling up quietly. A gig cancelled here. A club owner refusing to pay there. Comments online calling him a copy, a fake, a man living in another man's shadow. Each one left a small cut. He smiled through it all, but alone, the doubt grew louder. Was he honoring Elvis, or hiding behind him? Was he chasing a dream, or running from reality? By the time the idea of America's Got Talent appeared, his life felt like it was already in ruins. He was exhausted, emotionally and physically. The thought of standing on a massive stage felt almost cruel. What if he failed publicly? What if this last hope turned into one more humiliation? Still, something inside him whispered that this might be the last chance to turn pain into purpose. The audition process was long and unforgiving. Waiting rooms, forms, interviews, each step tested his resolve. When he finally stood backstage on audition day, surrounded by performers with incredible stories and confidence, he felt like an imposter. His Elvis suit suddenly felt like armor made of paper. He closed his eyes and thought of his mother back home, praying without telling him she was afraid too. The moment he stepped onto the AGT stage, time slowed. The lights erased the audience from view, leaving only shadows and sound. He felt his throat tighten. He tried to speak, to introduce himself, but the words tangled with emotion. The tears came before he could stop them. Years of pressure, grief, and fear poured out in seconds. It wasn't planned. It wasn't strategic. It was human. He talked about his life, not dramatically, not perfectly, but honestly. He talked about poverty, loss, and how music was the only thing that ever made him feel alive. The judges listened, truly listened. And when the music started, something miraculous happened. The stage no longer felt like a test. It felt like home. As he sang, he wasn't trying to be Elvis anymore. He was just a man telling his story through a familiar voice. Every note carried weight. Every pause carried memory. The audience felt it. They weren't just hearing a song, they were witnessing a life unfold in real time. When he finished, he didn't know if it was enough. But for the first time in years, he felt lighter. Advancing in the competition brought joy, but also fear. Each round raised expectations. Each performance reopened old wounds. He worked tirelessly, pushing his voice, his body, his emotions. There were nights he cried alone in his hotel room, terrified that the next performance might be his last. But he also discovered something new: support. Fellow contestants encouraged him. Crew members checked in on him. Strangers sent messages saying his story gave them strength. Even when criticism came, it felt different now. It no longer crushed him. He had already stood on stage with nothing but his truth and survived. He had faced his breaking point and found out he was still standing. When his journey on AGT eventually ended, it wasn't with despair. It ended with gratitude. He bowed, not just to the judges or the audience, but to the boy he once was, the boy who dared to dream in a small house with a broken TV. He returned home changed. Not rich. Not famous beyond recognition. But healed in a way that mattered. He sang again in the Philippines, this time to crowds who knew his story. When he cried on stage now, it wasn't from pain alone, but from connection. Parents brought their children to see him, whispering, "Look, dreams are possible." He used his voice not just to entertain, but to inspire, to remind people that brokenness does not disqualify you from hope. What made this Filipino Elvis cry on stage was not failure, it was the moment his past and future collided under bright lights. America's Got Talent didn't save him, it showed him he was already worth saving. And that lesson traveled far beyond one stage, reaching people who needed it most. If you've stayed with this story until now, remember this: sometimes life has to fall apart before it can be rebuilt stronger. Sometimes tears are not weakness, but proof that you still care, still dream, still believe. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and keep watching, because the next story might be the one that reminds you why you haven't given up yet.